Okay, welcome back. This is our last panel of the day, and it is a great one. We have a regulatory spotlight where we'll receive insights from Ireland's Data Protection Commission, and we are really delighted and honored to be joined today by Assistant Commissioner Sandra Skehan of Ireland's DPC. She has worked at the DPC since 2013. If you don't know, the Data Protection Commission is the national independent authority responsible for upholding the fundamental right of individuals in the EU to have their personal data protected. And the Irish DPC is the Irish Supervisor Authority for matters including the GDPR. Commissioner Skehan joins us from Dublin, Ireland today. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks a million for giving me the opportunity to address you all today.
Thank you. And I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator today, Rohan Massey, a partner at Ropes & Gray and leader of that firm's data privacy and cybersecurity practice. Rohan focuses his practice on all things cyber, including advising on complex global data protection and security compliance programs. I saw you were recently elected as the chair of the 12th Annual Sedona Conference International Program on cross-border data transfers and data protection laws as well. Rohan is in London. Welcome, Rohan.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I've been very much looking forward to your panel. I'll turn it over to you, Rohan.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been 12 months since I was last here and chatting with Sandra. And so for me, it's been an interesting 12 months, basically stuck at home working more and more on incident response during that time. But I am finally back in the office. In London, we have moved back to the office. I'm coming to you live from the office today. So I think the trends here are moving in the right direction. But what I'd like to ask you, Sandra, is really, over the last 12 months, what sort of trends have you been seeing in breach response being reported to the Irish DPC?
So I think in comparison to previous years, the trends tend to be the same. Just to, I suppose, highlight some top level statistics from the breach notification section within the DPC. Since the introduction of GDPR up until about the end of August this year, we've received in and around 21,500 breach notifications. Now this includes GDPR notifications, e-privacy notifications, and notifications that fall under the pre-GDPR legislation. So we're talking in and around 550-ish notifications a month, which is quite large. Now last year, which is quite interesting, only about 2% of those total breach notifications proved to relate to non-breaches. So in that context, they didn't actually meet the definition of a personal data breach under that Article 412. I suppose that shows us that there's something positive in that there doesn't tend to be a trend of over-reporting of non-breaches. As I had spoken to you beforehand, we're very interested to see the guidance that's due to come out from the EDPB around guidance for controllers about reporting and instances where they shouldn't. In terms of this year, we've received in and around 4,500 breach notifications, so that's between 100 and 150 a week. This has actually shown a 6% increase on breaches reported for the same period in 2021. In 2020. We've seen a decrease, though, of about 2% in notifications being received from the private sector, but an increase of 8% in reports from the public sector, which is quite interesting. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that later on and the causes of those. One of the biggest things that we have seen is the increase in breaches relating to processors, which is affecting a large number of data controllers. So that can account for part of the increase where the controllers, as required under the GDPR, have to submit those individual reports. As my unit is the assessment unit, we initially concentrate, I suppose, on the breach that's after occurring, and we engage with the processors on that. But then as a follow-up, we engage specifically with the DCs just to make sure that we've got information on, I suppose, matters covered around Article 28, such as the contracts that are in place and the steps taken by the controllers to ensure that the processors have adequate measures in place.
And on that basis, I mean, are you seeing, if I'm understanding it correctly, a greater number of direct reports from processors, or is it controllers as well?
It's both, actually.
Okay.
We have seen an increase in the processors actually getting in contact with us directly, which is fantastic. It saves us, I suppose, time to try, and if we have to issue recommendations straight away, or if there was ever the scenario where we might have to get processing to stop or something like that, the sooner the processors can get in contact with us, the better from that side of things.
And to move it on a little bit, I suppose, having an increase in the number of notifications, great news that it seems to be the right things that are being reported now. And that trend, I must say, as far as I'm aware, is mirrored in the UK, looking at the ICO statistics as well. We do seem to have seen a bit of a dip in the headline number. So hopefully the idea of over-reporting is getting ameliorated. But have you seen any sort of specific in the industry sectors that have been affected? I know you mentioned the public sector, or sort of geographic areas as well, because that would be of interest, I think.
Yeah, I suppose we don't actually publish a list of what we refer to as the worst offenders for reporting notifications. We do maintain a list internally, and that's we're doing a constant analysis on that. That feeds into the likes of guidance pieces, any potential interaction from other units within the DPC, such as our supervisory units. The headlines in relation to that list don't change very much within the top 10 organisations currently, and since the introduction of GDPR, those breaches comprise of only public sector bodies and banks. While I suppose if you look at the top 20 sector, that brings in the insurance and telco companies. So we're currently engaging with an awful lot of those organisations. We're putting in specific, say, timeframes, for instance, with which we expect extra measures to be put in place. I suppose on that side of things, it is always open to us then, as a follow-on from that, to initiate inquiries into to those offenders. In terms of the DPC's inquiries, which is just over 80 at the moment, about a quarter of those relate to breaches which span the public sector, charity sector, banking sector, and obviously those big tech sectors. Looking back at the concluded side of that, the 13, I think, statutory inquiries issued by the DPC, 8 of those has related to data breach incidents. So it is something that's very much on the top of our agenda to get to the bottom of. Even at an EDPB level, there's some interesting facts that have emerged when I started to analyse those figures. And in around 20% of those decisions that have been issued by other DPAs relate to data breach issues. So I suppose the majority of those at an EDPB level have closed without any further action being taken. This is mostly, and we're seeing the same from our side in whether or not we decide to take further action, is because of the follow-up that controllers are actually taking. They don't tend to end up in fines. So it's something that we do want to measure, because it is taken into consideration when the next steps are considered.
Great. So good to hear that sort of remediation steps, which are of course a very, very important part of any breach, especially with regard to, the rationale being the protection of individuals' information and the protection of those individuals. The remediation steps are given such a good weighting, I think. I think that's really an important message, certainly one that I, when I'm advising on it and I'm involved in incidents, do discuss a lot with the affected clients. Is we've got to make sure the remediation plan is very robust, that it's very broad, going to all the issues, and that it's implemented, strategically and effectively. One thing I do, I work for a US law firm. We have a lot of US clients and other clients that are based outside the European Economic Area, who until 3 years ago were happily sailing along within their own jurisdiction, really sort of untroubled, I think, by mandatory breach notification requirements in Europe. But that's kind of changed with the GDPR in some instances. And we all know of the extraterritorial effect. We know of the high levels of fines. And really, I stress that because I think those are the two pieces of information that have made the headlines continually for the last 3 years, and the ones that most people are outside the European Economic Area are aware of. Are you seeing sort of a lot of breach issues arising from organisations that aren't established in Ireland or in the EU?
Yes, most definitely we have actually, and we've been engaging with our counterparts in other EU countries. We've noticed that they've been receiving organisations who are based outside of the EU EEA area, but don't have any establishments within the EU. Now, they would still come under the remit of the GDPR if they're the processing actions or activities that they're are relating to either the provision of goods and services or where there's a consistent monitoring of data subjects' behaviours. So what we're noticing with those, though, is that there isn't a requirement under Article 27 to have an EU representative if they meet the criteria, and they don't tend to have somebody in place. You might have noticed there about 2 months ago, probably at this stage, where the Dutch DPA issued quite substantial fines to a company for non-compliance with that article. Now, it remains to be seen how that's going to be enforced, and it's definitely something that from the DPC's perspective that we're going to be raising at a EDPB level to try and get, I suppose, further clarification on that side. As it stands, when we do receive a notification like that, we instruct the company, once we've done a background check and I suppose look through what in Ireland would be the company register office to see whether or not there's a registered company within Ireland. We'll do a search through all of the internet to try and figure out if there is a base in Ireland. If there's not, we'll inform them that the one-stop shop isn't applicable and that they're obliged to inform every other DPA. Now, that's still the case in the even if they do have an Article 27 rep, so it is something that it needs to be considered by those companies. I suppose in relation to the other thing, which I will mention because we undertake a huge amount of analysis, is where companies may report a breach to us and citing that we are their lead supervisory authority. It's not something that we just take for granted and take on the face of it. We do a very in-depth analysis on it. I'm sure some of your clients have probably come across our lead supervisory authority questionnaire, which is extremely thorough, and we'll keep probing with questions until we're satisfied that we are the competent authority to look after the breach. If not, we'll engage with the company further, and there is one or two actually at the moment where we're going to have to decide what steps we'll take on it. But I suppose there's some bigger than multi-tech companies which has been in news over the past 2 years, which there was an EDPB task force set up to determine that. So it is an ongoing issue, and it's an ongoing, it's on every single agenda, I suppose, across the subgroups.
Right, so it should be. I mean, the one-stop shop was obviously one of the sort of core principles, as it were, in the GDPR. So I think an interesting point. And with regard to the representative, sitting here in London, and outside the European Economic Area now, that's again something that is very important for, especially I think UK companies that are no longer within the European Economic Area, who may are so used to sort of feeling part, organisationally at least, of Europe, thinking about actually what the impact of that may be, because they have a breach now. It might be that they will just be sort of notifying you in due course without understanding actually that could also have further implications.
Yeah, definitely, and we've seen that arising in one or two cases already, where notifications coming to us from the UK party. So we're continuing to engage with them, but also with the ICO. Obviously, we like to keep them up to date in relation to that side of things, because there is certain actions that from the Data Protection Acts in the UK, they can take certain steps to engage with the controllers and find out what's going on from that side. So we'll keep that cooperation going.
Well, it's certainly something we'll keep in mind. I mean, as I said at the beginning, it's been a very, very busy year certainly for my practice, looking at, advising clients on a number of incidents and breaches of all kinds. Now, I think some of that may have come from the fact that we're living through a pandemic, and we've had this sort of systemic change in the way that we work, with everybody working remotely, and people in different areas becoming very focus point areas of the economy, for example, the healthcare sector and education sectors. And we've seen, unfortunately, cyber criminals noting that and reacting to that as well. So I'd like to now, if we can, sort of move on to look at if you've seen trends within the types of incidents and attacks that are being reported to you, or complaints that are being made, with regard to sort of incidents, etc., and how they're being handled. I mean, from your perspective, did the sort of the pandemic bring any changes to the types of incident you were facing?
Yes, it has indeed. I suppose maybe to start, just in terms of the breakdown of the type of breaches being reported, it's generally been the same. In the general trend is remaining the same, and it's continued into 2021. The majority of breaches do arise from unauthorized disclosure of personal data, and that's in around 82% at the moment. That is, however, a drop from 4% last year, which we're assigning that to the pandemic and the move to people, the hybrid working and the working from home side of things. It does, those unauthorized disclosures, and when I say that, I refer to the inadvertent issuing of, say, emails, communications, documentation, that type of thing, to third parties who shouldn't have received it. It tends to be due to a lack of proper operational practices, and then again, human error. So I don't know if it's because of working from home that people are a little bit more engaged with I suppose, using email, that they have to pay a little bit more attention. I suppose from that side of things as well, we have seen an increase in the use of the to or the CC fields instead of the BCC fields, which we've received quite a few of those type of breaches, which we hadn't expected before. I suppose yourself, you're probably aware of the news articles with the UK Ministry of Defence and the issues that's having, but it's extremely unfortunate as to what's after happening, but it's a great example to highlight to people when they should use the BCC fields. I suppose in terms of the pandemic itself, apart from the emails issuing, we did notice in around a 23% in the number of documents being lost or stolen, increasing. We've kind of associated that to people taking files and documents from the office back home, and cars being broken into, that kind of thing, which is it wouldn't happen on a normal basis. We've tried to issue specific guidance around that side of things, and to organisations to ensure that they have policies around that. The other side of things is, I suppose, and I'd say a lot of controllers would be in agreement with this, was the introduction of measures by the government to handle the pandemic, especially in the financial sector. So within Ireland, some of those measures included allowing financial institutions to pause loan repayments for persons, so to I suppose avoid adversely affecting borrowers' credit ratings. I think that's across the globe that's probably happened. So within Ireland, the lenders were obliged to use specific codes, and there was a lot of incorrect codes being issued, which has had quite detrimental effects on people, especially people who are going for loans that may not have got it because of their credit register rating. In terms of the ransomware attack side of things, and this it's increasing all the time. We've had, compared to 2020, we've seen just over a 35% increase in cyber instances. That's gone up to an overall figure of in around 5% for total breaches notifications received, which is it's climbing all the time. in particular, it's in and around that ransomware attack side of things. What we're seeing from that side is that, I suppose, while organisations are initially putting in place very effective ICT security measures, they're not continuing to take proactive steps to monitor and review those measures, especially in light of the changes to the threats. They don't seem to be keeping up to date with that side of things. And there's a slight lack of training staff to ensure that they're aware of evolving threats. We issue an awful lot of questions in and around issues in relation to audits that have been done, that kind of thing. From the responses we're receiving to those questions, issues around, I suppose, the level of perimeter security was evident throughout them. That's kind of including, I suppose, a lack of overall knowledge of the company's ICT infrastructure and landscape. So we're kind of looking potentially that's due to a focus being on key functions within the organisations and not paying particular attention to the peripheral areas or the end access at endpoints. So especially around that remote working side of things. We're also seeing, which is, we can't figure out why, I suppose, is issues caused by lack of data protection impact assessments being undertaken, especially in relation to engaging with third-party processors. So we're recommending to people that that's done before any third party is engaged. The next step, I suppose, on from that is that when they do engage with the third party processors, that side of things isn't been included into the threat landscape of the organisation. It seems to be lacking in the assessments that have been undertaken, which is quite surprising. From an employee perspective, I suppose, we're seeing lack of policies in place. So especially around that remote access policy and procedures where people may just not be aware of, I suppose, copying things onto USB sticks and the encryption side around that, if they're transferring work from, one person to another. So we're currently doing up guidance in and around that side of things, and we do encourage people to keep an eye on our website in and around that side. The other thing we're seeing, which it's very obvious, but it continues to astound us, around weak passwords and the permission to reuse the passwords across all applications. It's an issue. What we have noticed, I suppose, in relation to the cyber instances is poor responses to the actual instance. I suppose people not 100% sure of how they're supposed to react straight away. So we're pushing on that side of things to make sure that people have quite robust incident response plans in place so that they know exactly what to do the minute it happens. So that's kind of overall.
Can I just ask a question? It's one that's coming from the audience as well. So, I mean, that's an amazing background and sort of set of your robust investigation plus the guidance that you're giving across all of those elements. Is that the same, or is your investigation, level of investigation, the same, irrespective of whether it's a public body or a private organisation that reports to you?
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, it definitely is. We've got specific tech experts on our team who do Trojan work, and they assess it on the merits of the case. It's across the board. It doesn't make a difference who the controller or organisation is. They get the same robust level of querying from us. I'm sure we annoy a lot of people with the amount of questions that we ask when they're trying to deal with the actual attack, but it's vital from our side to ask those questions.
And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, they are questions that need to be answered. I don't think ransomware is going away. It is still a business. We know that ransoms do get paid. I have heard stories of post-attack where payments have been made, actually getting good customer service where the attacker has come back and asked if everything is okay, stopping, I think, only just short of asking for a review on Trustpilot. But it's obvious that these things are still happening. But Sandra, look, I know that we're getting very, very close to time. It was fantastic to cover the ground that we did, so thank you very much. Really interesting to hear about the trends, to hear that some educators working, I think, regarding incident response. There are still behaviours, especially as we move into a hybrid working environment, which is going to be a mix of previous history of last year as to how we continue to protect personal data, both from a security perspective as well as a broader transparency perspective, so that people know that incidents are well taken care of and fully remediated. And of course, we have the international aspect, people understanding what their obligations are if they are not in Europe. So wonderful. With that, I'll I think, hand over to Bruce.
Well, thank you, Rohan. And Sandra, thank you so much for your time and for your insights today. We always really appreciate it. Good to know the customer service level in the ransomware business is staying pretty high. That's interesting. I had no idea. All right, so that's it. Thank you all. I'm going to just quickly sign off, but I'd like to thank everybody at Kroll for, again, being our lead sponsor today. I'd like to acknowledge our friends from Ankara, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, John Reed Star Consulting, and Strauss Friedberg, and our lead law firm today, Oric, and the 13 world-class law firms that were represented here today as sponsors and supporters. Thank you. And to everybody who joined us sometime today, whether the 4 a.m. people from California or whoever else, thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed the event, and I hope we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye-bye.